presents Heresy from the Haven, coming to you from the Gamers Haven in lovely Spokane, Washington.
Number 3,
episode 3. I'm Bob Keller. This is my co-host, Stephen Leist. Jay Prickett. And so on this episode, we're going to start talking more about the sportsmanship aspect required, suggested in picking your faction.
recommended.
I like that. Recommended in picking your faction. There's a lot of aspects, and through this series, we're going to have about 8 episodes. We've talked about different things that will bring you into Horus Heresy, and how kind of the background, some of the things you want to think about when you're picking your faction in Horus Heresy. Our next episodes, we're going to do a quick dive, I'll say, into Loyalist Legions, Traitor Legions, and then some of the other non-Legion factions. But today, we're going to talk about sportsmanship and why it's important in all gaming, really, but I think even more so in Horus Heresy. All right, so in the past couple episodes, I've used this phrase, being honest with yourself.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
I have no clue.
Let's take a deep dive into what I mean by being honest with yourself. When you're building an army in Horus Heresy, there are, and we'll talk about more of these later, but there are units that are just better. There are loadouts on units that are just better. Name a couple off the top of my head real fast. Telepathy Librarians, really good. Really going to ruin your opponent's day. Recon squads with Nemesis bolt rifles. Really, really, really good.
Heavy support squads with Volkite Culverins.
Right, and Volkite Culverins themselves aren't bad. It's just that the rifle version is, I think, 10 points a model, and the heavy support selection is only 5 points a model for a longer range, more shots. So it's just a super efficient for the points unit. Doesn't make it a bad unit. Contemptor Dreadnoughts, I personally think they're exactly where they should be in strength. You're talking about a chapter master who's been put in this dreadnought armor. They should be monsters on the table. Way too points efficient.
Point cost.
Yeah, their point cost is way too low. And I even had, as a great example, our good friend IHA was talking about building an army. He was talking about building his Imperial Fists, and he told me, well, I'm never going to take a recon squad. And I told him, no, you can take recon squad. There's nothing wrong with that. You can take a Contemptor Dreadnought, or I think one of the averages is 1 per 1,000 points. You can take a Telepathy Librarian. But if you're going to build a list that is multiple Telepathy Librarians and 2 or 3 recon squads and 4 or 5 Contemptor Dreadnoughts and a couple of Volkite Culverin heavy support squads, now you're not being honest with yourself what you're trying to get out of this game.
Or maybe you are.
Or maybe you are. Like, again, there's nothing really wrong with building that list if your opponent, if the social contract you're going into with your opponent is on the same boat, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But you could, if even in a normal list, I actually run a 5-man recon squad in my World Eaters because I like my despoilers to charge a unit, and we'll get more into the rules later. Recon squad give them a benefit if they shoot the unit first and pin that unit, then my despoilers get a bonus. And recon squads existed in Horus Heresy even with the World Eaters. So including some of those units really isn't that big of a deal. Just including all of them, well, what are you doing then? What are you trying to portray to your opponents? On the flip side, I have a friend right now who's building a Thousand Suns list, and Thousand Suns are pretty universally accepted as not being one of the stronger legions available. And then on top of it, he is making sure, not even making sure, he's building a list to the Thousand Suns. He's like, I'm not going to take this unit. They wouldn't have that. I'm not going to take this unit. I'm like, oh, you understand that's you're probably not going to have a lot of success on the tabletop. And he's literally like, I don't care. So the being honest with yourself part that I'm talking about is, let's say you go to your local game store and you pick up a game with somebody that you don't know, and you have that first list we talked about, and you just ruin your opponent's fun. And then you show up the next week and you're like, hey, I want to play a game, and nobody wants to play with you. Have you been honest with yourself as to why you built that list? Or if you're showing up to a game and you get your teeth knocked in and you're like, man, that really sucked. Well, have you been honest with yourself about building that army list? Have you really said this is, and be okay with it yourself. This is the reason I'm building this list. I'm building it for this specific reason. And you have to be okay with not doing well or doing too good. You want to kind of try to build that balanced list.
I think that's probably the biggest aspect is, if you're going to be honest with yourself, just make sure you accept what you're being honest with yourself about.
Right.
on, am I going to be a competitive player and am I going to get upset? No, I really have no grounds to get upset when nobody wants to play me because I'm going to be the competitive player. Or you're going to be the narrative player and you may get stopped. But as long as you're honest with yourself and you're like, you know what, I had a great time because I brought a narrative list and
Exactly.
I may have gotten stopped, but man, I had a great time playing with toy soldiers.
Right.
So
Accepting that honesty, I think, is really important because these kind of types of games, let's be honest, they can be expensive in both
Mhm.
time and money. So if you put all this time, all this effort in, or your opponent, you have to understand, put all this time, all this effort into, and then, like we mentioned earlier a few episodes ago, these feel bad moments.
Right.
Be honest with yourself because don't want to waste your time or your opponent's time.
Right. If it takes more time for your opponent to set up their army than it does for them to take it off the table, you probably built a list that might be a little too strong.
and there's lots of ways you can curb that problem too. I travel with my stuff, all of it. I also have multiple lists built at multiple point values,
Right.
and they have they're varying in their competitiveness.
Right.
So if you do go to your local game store and you are honest with yourself that, like, hey, I just want to have a good time. I want my opponent to have a good time.
Right.
Show up with options. Ask them how their list looks.
Right.
Like, what kind of game are they looking
What's
for?
their experience level? Have they
Mhm.
played much?
Absolutely.
If they haven't played a lot, and you can tailor your list. If you have options to change your list out at the time, you can change your list out, and you might come up against that person's like, I built this list that nobody can beat. It's brutal. Okay, well then I want to play on my competitive units. Let's have that social contract where we're going to try to knock each other's teeth out as quick as we can.
That can be super fun.
It can be a
that is
fun
out
game.
there.
Absolutely can be a fun game. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with any way you build an army list as long as you're being honest with yourself. What do you want out of this hobby? What do you want out of this game? What do you want out of this experience? And if you are being honest with yourself, then you shouldn't be disappointed with any outcome you get. Yeah, I think so. You're going to hear us say that a lot, or me at least, to be honest with yourself part. And it's sometimes it takes a long look in the mirror, but again, there's really no wrong answer if you know what you're expecting out of the experience.
But also, it's a key point
It really is.
in when you're deciding to get into Horus Heresy and you're going to make your selection. You really do need to start off with being honest with yourself.
Right.
What your reasons are, and we described some of the things already in how to choose and what you're going to be looking for. But
Right.
being honest with yourself when it comes down to really getting into the nitty gritty is an important aspect in understanding the level of fun that you're going to be having.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an important thing to think about when you're picking a faction, when you're picking which legion, when you're picking as much. I think it's just as important to keep that into consideration as your fluff, your story, your backstory, your painting scheme. I think understanding why you're building this army and what you want out of your gaming experience is just as important, if not the most important thing you can do when you're picking your legion, picking your faction.
So let's go through real quick then. All of us give like an individual. Be honest with yourself. How we got into this and how you are honest with yourself. Why don't you go first, Jay?
I'm completely honest with myself in the fact that you tell me my army is terrible. We've mentioned before, Thousand Sons are commonly known as one of the weaker legions.
Mm-hmm.
Salamanders are right there.
They can be.
They can be.
Right.
I've seen a lot of podcasts, a lot of different groups out there. Salamanders don't get much love.
They don't.
So I took that as a personal challenge to make salamanders work.
I think you asked me, what should I do? And I went, drop pods.
So I first tried vehicles because it's all short range. I wasn't going to take las cannons. I wasn't going to take the commonly fluff-wise weapons they might not take. I wanted to do it the salamander way. And vehicles just were not getting there. So I come over to Bob. We're here one day. We're just hanging out. And I think you just mentioned, hey, what about drop pods?
Right.
I was like, drop
You have
pods?
a bunch of Melta, a bunch of Flamers. Drop pods seem like they'd be pretty good. Get in your opponent's face with your whole faction immediately. And then what happened after that, Jay?
I completely Took me about a month to buy a whole new 3,000 point army for my.
A month, my butt.
Okay,
man.
maybe 2 weeks.
I saw a picture. But after I said drop pods, you sent me a picture like 2 days later of like 10 drop pods that were in primer, and I'm like, oh well, I guess you really got serious about that.
I mean, 11 in the Caribbean, if we're being honest.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Which made my salamanders a pretty competitive army.
First game I played you afterwards, pretty sure you went, I went, you went, and that game was over. That game was over real fast, and it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me to get waffle stomped like that. But it was, I could see how some players might, on the receiving end of that, go, I wasn't very fun.
Yep. Then I immediately okay, I need to build Imperial Fists and not take Dreadnoughts, not take Terminators.
Right.
We got to have something else.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you could even take that list too and size it down with the drop pod assault, not have as many drop pods, like just only run 3 or 4 drop pods, and then everything else.
It is tough with the drop pod Rite of War, where everything has to be in drop pods.
Does it? Everything
It
have to
does.
be?
Yeah. So it's kind of skewed that way, but you can also just kind of play it less in your face. Drop your tax squads midfield kind of out of the way, and there's a lot. I wanted to kind of prove to myself I could make salamanders work.
And you did.
But one of the reasons that you needed to do that, right? If you're being honest with yourself, I know Jay pretty well. I know Bob pretty well. We've been around a lot. Efficiency, right?
I should get a tattoo of efficiency.
For you, efficiency is the thing. So you were struggling with, I have this list. I know it can be good. How do I make it more efficient? And that's when the drop pod aspect came in. I remember listening to that and everything. Your competitiveness, it wasn't really trying to build a list to be super good.
No.
It was playing to his, if he's going to be honest with himself, he needed to be efficient.
Yeah, it is. It's this thing where, again, I was honest with myself, and I wanted to prove to myself I could do it. It's done, and now it's time to pull back. It's something I'm not going to play to a new player, especially. It's not going to happen.
Sure, but I would love to actually play against that army again and I would change my list and just learn the tactics that I'm like, okay, I need more screening units. I need to pull my units that are the most important for a counter charge further back so he can't drop pod right down. I'm like, I would personally love the challenge of playing against that list again and see what I can do differently.
So it's kind of working. Sorry, Steve. It's kind of working with your opponent. The game Steven and I were playing before we even deploy, we're talking strategy together.
Right.
Hey, I'm going to come in and do this. Maybe screen with some tax squads. You kind of you learn together and you're having fun at the same time.
Right.
And one of the things with being honest with yourself, again, because I know you for a long time, you step up to a challenge. You want to understand how best to do things. If you're going to be honest with yourself, that's why you look forward to playing against those terrifying lists.
Right.
And another thing about Horus Heresy, real quick, not to get off subject too much, but the drop pod list, yeah, it can be terrifying. But as we learned, if you mishap and I get to place you 24 inches across the
game's over.
Game's over in the opposite
Right.
direction.
All of a sudden your flamers and meltas
Yep.
at short range or
Game's
way
over.
over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's different factors.
When I built my world leaders, I knew that I wanted to do a whole bunch of close combat. In being honest with myself, knowing that now I could take a lot more heavy support, I could take a lot more long range firepower to try to support my units getting across the table, but that's not how I wanted to play them. I wanted to play them where the nails are biting and they're deep into fighting off the rage, and I want them to run across the table and hit people with axes. And when I win games with them, it's pretty fun because normally it's Karn and 3 or 4 models left on the table.
That's
That's
about
it. Yep, about everything else is dead, and it matters not from where the blood flows. I have a blast with it. My opponent's been able to knock out 90% of my army, and yeah, it works out the way I designed it to. But win or loss, and that's kind of another thing. It's maybe this is a good segue to get into that the tabletop etiquette, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, wait a second.
I'm sorry. Go.
Don't you want me to talk about my
I
being honest with
suppose.
myself?
I suppose.
Okay. I guess I'll just go into it, and then I'll let you transition. So the being honest with myself aspect came in when I started buying models to play specifically in the tournament we were going to be holding. And
Conqueror's Crown.
Conqueror's Crown. And I bought the units that would be good. I wanted to make a solid list. But also, I used to be, what did you call it? A win
Win at all costs.
win at all costs player.
With other systems,
With other
not
games.
tabletop.
And I sort of recognized that as a habit I wanted to break personally, and I worked really hard over some amount of years to really curb that back.
Right.
And then
You've done great with it too. You really have.
well, thank you. The fun part was I built a solid list, and it was a tournament ready list. We didn't know people were going to bring and things like that.
Which is an episode we'll get into later. Is when going to events and you don't know what you're going to run into. Also, kind of ties into how you want to build your list.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want to show up and get completely stomped. But I didn't want to show up and completely stomp people. And it turned out that I actually first tournament ever got best general and first place for tactics and points, and there were some really tough opponents, and I built a solid list, but it wasn't overwhelmingly so. But I also, at the end of that tournament, I think I came to you and said, I don't know if I like tournaments, because I didn't want to fall back into those habits. So now that I've played in another tournament since then, but I've been honest with myself, and I've dialed back.
It's keeping in mind your opponent's fun. It's keeping in mind, and depending on the nature of if you're playing an event, nature of the event itself. Like actually, I've got on the back burner right now. I'm going to run a competitive Horus Heresy tournament. Like, do it. Let's bring out the beasts. Let's bring out the nasty stuff. There's a time and a place for it, and being truthful with yourself, being honest with yourself about what you want from the experience is pretty important in building your list.
So yeah, I'm now trying to acquire less good units that I can actually play and not feel like I'm playing that competitive aspect. So, but now we
can I transition?
You can transition.
All right, I'll transition. Tabletop etiquette is a very important thing. There's a lot of different ways tabletop etiquette can play into a game, and this ties into choosing your legion and building your army list with how you respond to a game that you're playing, and maybe you're getting beat bad or you're beating your opponent bad, and how you respond to that, how you react. Like if you're the person getting beat bad, you don't want to be tossing models. I've seen guys throw models. I've seen guys throw dice. I've seen guys pick their armies up and walk away, and that was not anybody's intention going into that game. So it's having that etiquette, losing with grace, winning with grace, I think is very important. And I think it's something that's important to keep in consideration when you're picking your army list, like when you're building your army list.
It's not necessarily easy.
No.
It's not. And it's okay if you have those thoughts of you really wanted to win and you didn't.
Right.
And you tried a little bit too hard and you won by a little bit too much. We're all human.
Yeah. It's what does winning mean to you and what does losing mean to you with toy soldiers on a Saturday afternoon.
Exactly.
If I'm playing Night Lords and I deep strike on somebody with a bunch of fear units, we'll get into that later, and also now their leaderships are dropped, and then I hit them with 4 or 5 pinning units, and they don't have a turn. I just took their turn away. That's not very fun for your opponent. And when you built that list going into it, knowing that this is how this mechanism is going to work, then you have to accept the consequences that this person may not be having a good time.
I remember what I was going to say. Don't be too hard on yourself either.
Sure.
If you're learning the game and you lose, that's not necessarily how all your games are going to go. You've learned something new. So don't be too hard on yourself to where you give up too early or because of some mistake you made. Something I struggle with is the dumb mistakes we make while playing when you have a good strategy. And
we'll get into that story at some point.
You just
right after you won Best General, I'm like, all right.
Yeah,
let's play a game.
Here you go, newbie. So I learned.
You'll learn about telepathy librarians real fast.
I learned many lessons, and you always are going to learn. So as long as you're open to the learning aspect and not being too hard on yourself, you're going to enjoy this for a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And either side of the coin.
Yeah, the opposite side of that coin is as the new player, and then myself and Bob as kind of the old hats, knowing this rule set from back in the day. Yeah, a little bit of gray, huh? A little bit of gray. I take it upon myself to, we've mentioned it a few times, try to get those feel bad moments when it comes to, I never want to win or capitalize on my opponent forgetting something the army can do.
Great point. Did you want to react to that? That you could pull that tank away and I won't be able to shoot it? Like, there's different things.
I always take it upon myself, and you try to balance it. You're not trying to tell them tactics, but it's just like, hey, this is a situation. These are the kind of reactions you can make. Did you know you can do this?
Right.
We thought about doing that, and it's just they're learning. I'm still learning.
Right.
We're learning together.
Yeah, I've had people, or I'm the veteran, and I've had people tell me, "How come you're not doing this? You should be doing this."
Recon squads have sniper. I've heard.
Oh yeah, right. I was rolling a 5+ precision shot on them for the first time in games. And, that's not how they work. That's that. Yeah. So keeping your opponent's fun in mind is very important when you're building your army list. And then if you have a game that's going one way or the other too much, remember it's a social contract, and that you're trying to have an enjoyable experience with this person so you can keep playing in the future. And that's good for the community, it's good for everybody.
And keeping your opponent's fun in mind, and then what you just said too, I think that leads us naturally into the ambassadors versus gatekeepers, right?
Right.
And explaining
Very much so.
that, and how those roles play in a community, and how one can be very detrimental and how one can be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. The term gatekeeper is something that as a person that I've played for a very long time, I've played tabletop industry games for a long time, I never really experienced it as much as I had when I started playing Horus Heresy 2nd Edition. And first thing I do, of course, you go on social media, you join the different groups, and you start throwing ideas out. And you've got some person who's like, "Oh, great, here come the 40K players." And I'm like, "Wow, is it that apparent?" But it's not even that as much as some of the questions were valid questions, like, how does this work? Does it work this way or this way? And not being that person, not being the person that is
just saying you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you're doing it wrong, or oh, you must be new, or you must be, it's not being a good ambassador to the hobby, which is, in my opinion, being a good ambassador is helping the person if they forget rules, or heck, I've even had people. This was in a 40K game, but I suddenly realized in a tournament situation, you don't have anything in your army to hurt my vehicles, so I'm actually going to turn my vehicles around backwards and run a matching backwards, so you have a chance to actually hurt my army. Yeah, it's otherwise.
You did it.
I did that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did that one time. Yeah, it was armor 13 on the front, and he only had 2 weapons in the entire army that could hurt armor 13. But I had 10 armor in the rear, so I just turned everything around backwards and went at it.
That's a great
We
ambassador.
had a great game. Yeah, absolutely. So it's important, in getting into the hobby and building and playing, that you don't want to be that gatekeeper. You don't want to be that old timer that's like, oh, you must be new, or you're ruining our hobby with a list that maybe you didn't realize was too powerful. It was too overpowered. Being a good ambassador. I think that's a key point.
If you want to grow the game, we want more people to play, and more people to come down to the shop to play. It's never a bad thing.
Right.
I think one of the key things too, is to share with your opponents how you learn, because that can play a huge factor into how you play. Personally, I learn by losing, and I lose hard. Do the things that you're going to do, the old goats, like use the tactics that you're going to use. And after I had won that first tournament, you showed me
some cool tricks
that I was missing. But it's just one of those things. Like, if you tell your opponent how you want to learn, like, hey, maybe I don't pick up on things really well. I'm not really remembering the rules very well. Things like that, and like, can you help me out with it? Most people, if you were just upfront and honest, are going to help you 100%.
Yeah.
And if you tell your opponent, hey, I just want you to kick my butt, stomp my teeth in, and I want to then explain as you're doing it how that worked, and if that's how they learn, you're still going to have a great game. It's an aspect that a lot of people don't think about.
Sure.
So I would recommend telling your opponent how you learn, and having them help you in that way also.
Kind of, what are your expectations for that game? That's the contract.
Yep. Being honest with yourself. More than once in the past 20 plus years of running tournaments, I've had people brand new to the hobby, and they're like, well, I don't know if I should play in that tournament. I'm like, look, it's a $10 entry fee. You get to go. I said, you just walk up to your table every single time, every opponent say, hey, this is my 4th game ever. You're going to kick my butt. Do you mind if we just kind of, never have I had. I've talked to every one of those people after a tournament that have done that, and they say this was a blast. This was the most fun I've had. I got to meet new people. I got to play against armies I haven't seen. Everybody was super helpful. Being honest with your position. Or I'm looking at you. I'm a veteran. I'm looking at your list. I have a stronger list than you, and you don't seem that experienced. Let me help you during the game and let me dial things back. I'm going to tell you why I'm going to do something and how I'm going to play this. Next turn, you need to be careful because I'm going to move this thing up. It's kind of a bait and switch. I'm trying to for you to focus on this, so this you can go do this. So knowing that I can do that, maybe you can prepare for it by doing this instead. And just, again, being an ambassador, not being a gatekeeper, I think it's very important.
Absolutely.
More fun for everyone.
Narrative lists versus competitive lists. Again, touching on that, it's something where you really have to be honest with yourself on what you're doing when you're building that army. I'll circle back to recon units. Recon units, it's a no-brainer, but there's multiple weapon options. Shotguns, not that great. Nemesis bolt rifles, amazing. Maybe you don't always have to take the Nemesis bolt rifles. Maybe do a recon unit and figure out a new role for them. So when you're building your list, you don't always have to optimize that list. Every unit doesn't have to be optimized all the way out. There's a lot of fun combinations you can put together. Concussion on those shotguns might surprise your opponent, and maybe you found a new use for that unit, or maybe they're just designed to go around the back and get an objective that they don't have to sit back and snipe the whole
Or
time.
maybe you read about it and you're literally building a list from like a unit from the lore.
Right? You mean like the leader of my recon squad, Gruner, who was the one who trained Karn when he first became.
And some of us know way more about the lore than we should.
Deep dive.
Deep dive.
So,
That's right.
That's there's all kinds of aspects to it, and
So you built narrative lists and competitive lists.
yes.
What has been kind of your decision making in list building that changed between competitive and narrative?
Well, competitive and narrative, man, I'm Alpha Legion, so I can use anything.
Right.
And I can use it well. And I can use it in ways that most people don't think about using it.
Right.
So when I'm building a competitive list, I'm looking at solid units that...
From other legions. If you don't know, Alpha Legion can bring in units from other armies and they get their special rules. So now you're
Right.
looking at Suzerain.
So I technically can pull from,
Volunteeras.
I can pull from anything.
Right.
But overall, I would say I'm using that specific aspect to fill something I'm lacking. Whether I need a really good close combat unit or I need a really good shooting unit. If I'm going competitive, that's what I'm looking for. With all the other units, I'm also trying to make sure that I have an answer to everything. I'm not
Swiss Army
spamming
knife.
units.
Right.
I'm making a Swiss Army knife competitive list. When I'm doing the narrative list, I'm trying to do fun things because I chose an army that has a lot of weird tactics.
Yeah, it does.
And it's all in what you can imagine and within those parameters. And I've looked around online and I've talked with people, and there are so many different ways you can play Alpha Legion. And so when I look for a narrative list, I'm thinking, okay, so the parts of the lore that I know that they've been a part of, and their tactics they're trying to do, how do I replicate that? And it usually turns out that I don't have very many tanks. I don't have very many dreadnoughts, if at all.
Right.
I'm mostly infantry, and I'm trying to infiltrate your back line and do funny things. And just if I get my headhunter squad into your back line and they blow up one tank, that is a great day for you.
Right. Or shoot one character.
Or shoot one character out of a unit. It's those fun things, and it's like, all right, they're dead now.
Right. But they got to do that.
But they got to do that one thing. So that's how kind of competitive versus narrative works for me. As somebody who's new and trying to figure it out still, and with the lore balance and things like that, I'm just gonna not take a lot of those good units that we were talking about by choice, because that's not necessarily how they play out in the books.
Sure.
And there are instances where they do use all of those things, but the majority
Every
of the time,
legion uses everything.
Yeah. they're operatives. They're the CIA kind of the Space Marines. So that's how it plays out for me.
Yeah, makes sense.
Awesome. My point of view, and this has kind of been true.
Is it foot salamanders versus drop pod salamanders?
This is actually the history of my wargaming, my history of card gaming, is I take something I'm drawn to. I pick something that I like. I never look at the metagame, the top list. I'm not drawn to that at all. Right. I take something that I want to play, and then I make that
figure out how to use it.
Yeah, competitive might not be the right word, but I want to make it be playable. So
Efficient?
efficient. So
I can let me interject one thing
Yeah.
here. As a person who's run a game store for as many years as I have and met as many gamers as I have, I can count on one hand how many people I've met who truly do not care to their core if they win or lose a game. So when you're playing a game, I don't care if it's Monopoly or even Solitaire, for goodness sake, like you want to win. You want to win the game, but it's how you respond to the winning or losing that's important.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. So for example, I would say my salamanders are competitive, but I made them without the common competitive units.
Right.
My Imperial Fist list is an armored spearhead that has no dreadnoughts, no terminators. One of the best units you can probably take in Imperial Fist is a recon squad,
Right.
but the armored spearhead Rite of War won't let me take them efficiently.
There's
that word. So I kind of take these off the wall ideas and I kind of build them the best that I can to my abilities and play them that way. I honestly combine narrative and competitive almost together.
Yeah.
I don't like the word competitive per se, because I don't really care if I win or lose, but I want to play to the best that I can.
Sure.
That's a kind of a personal goal.
Sure. That makes sense. For myself, with my world leaders, I do try to keep them as narrative as I can for that battle. But in the fall, I'm actually heading up to British Columbia for a narrative tournament. And I usually take tactical squad, and I call my lawn chair unit. They sit in the back, they sit on an objective, and they do what they're going to do, sit on the objective. So they're really not biting. They're not playing into the narrative of the nails biting when they're raging forward. And then I take that little 5-man recon squad. Different units that can do things during my game to help me score points for the game, but the rest of my army is charging forward and hitting people with axes. For this event, I dropped my tactical squad and my recon squad and something else I'm not remembering right now, and added in just assault squads. So literally that event I'm going to, every model in my army either doesn't have a gun or has close combat weapons, and they're never going to shoot those close combat weapons. So I'm leaning way into the narrative side of it. And if I come against a gun line, that game's going to be over fast. I'm not going to have a lot of fun with that. But I'm trying to build an army list that is really about them losing control and being all about the rage and really going into it. And it's, in my mind, that's more of a narrative list than a competitive list. It still may do well.
So one note on that, because you kind of have to be careful sometimes too. If you take something, narratively speaking, all close combat, sometimes certain armies might actually have a challenge against that.
Right.
So you inadvertently might become competitive. My armored spearhead, if the other opponent doesn't bring that much anti-tank,
Just turn on stuff around.
It's all armor 14 is the problem. But you kind of inadvertently became too competitive for your opponent.
Sure.
But hopefully you can recognize it and still have that fun game.
There's always a rock, paper, scissors. No matter what balanced list you have, there's going to be a list out there that has the answer. That's actually be said about competitive lists too. Like you can bring a list that is what you think is competitive as can be, and someone might have the hard answer, and it might not have been a competitive list, but it's
But I
a
think
weakness in the list.
I think that's one of the reasons we're talking about it, is that we want to make people, aware of all these things and the stuff you can run into.
Right. Yeah. And just I think all these aspects that we're talking about are just very important when you're picking Legion and when you are building an army.
Yep, for sure.
That's all pretty important. So, well, I think that's probably about it for this one.
I think we're ready to wrap,
Yeah, okay. Well, next time we're stepping into legions. There's 9 traitor, 9 loyalists. Each one of us have taken 3 legions. We're only going to spend 3-4 minutes per legion. Talk about some of their backstory, some of their fluff, and what units you would see traditionally in those types of armies, and what units you can kind of exploit with some of the specific army rules.
Basically, a really quick, this is your competitive unit list, this is your fluffy unit list.
Right, and these are the units you're going to take in that list with that rule set that's going to be most efficient. These are the ones that are fluffy. Walk you through those legions to help you pick, make your choice on which legion you should pick to join this amazing game called Horus Heresy.
Awesome.
Yeah, if you guys like what we're doing, remember, like, follow, subscribe, and this series will wrap up on legion picking, army picking. After we go through the legions, we go through some of the other factions. We're going to talk about allies, and then we're going to
do list building too.
Yeah, we're going to do list building as well.
I think that'll be the final one.
Perfect. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, everyone.